Okay, so I apologize in advance for any shoddy camera work that comes about from doing this. But anyway, so I mentioned the concept of areas and zones, which are two terms that are kind of pretty interchangeable in my opinion. It really doesn't matter what you call them. But I suppose specifically, if you're looking back at kind of where those terms come from, the concept of areas originated in the old TSR Marvel Superheroes RPG, and that was the default kind of level of you know, combat representation, or you know, like map representation in that game. In that you didn't measure things in elements of, you know, increments of 5 feet or 10 feet or whatever. And it wasn't played on like a 5-foot grid. Rather, the game divided the map up into larger chunks of space that were referred to as areas. And so all of the ranges in the game were represented in terms of areas. Your heat blast could, you know, had a range of 5 areas, and so areas being just kind of like a really rough, loose term for a broad kind of section of the map, large enough that generally anyone within an area is considered to be able to, you know, move up to each other, basically engage with each other in combat. And then so it actually took movement actions to move between areas. So, you know, every round you could run X number of areas across the map, or, you know, whatever it was. And in order to engage in somebody in combat, you actually had to enter the area that they were in. And then later, Fate, the third edition of Fate, as kind of started off in Spirit of the Century, and then through the Dresden Files and some of the other systems, or some of the other games that use the new Fate engine, have gone back to what now they refer to as zones, but they give a homage to the Marvel Superheroes areas concept. And the way that, again, zones are just basically, you kind of break up the map into natural logical segments, and so oftentimes it will be a single room will represent one zone or area, and so your character can generally, you know, without having to like sprint or do some other kind of special movement, you can generally like move from one area to another area within a round, or zone to another zone within a round, excuse me. And then there's like you can like sprint, so you can try to cross several areas in one round, and etc., etc. But so to give you guys an idea what I'm talking about when I'm talking about zones and stuff, would be like, you know, say that you were in a ballroom, and so let's get a quick representation to say, you know, like you've got this main kind of like dance floor area of the ballroom, and this is where everybody's dancing, and so you might kind of cordon off this area, and you can draw it in squares if you want to, or you can kind of, I like to just kind of keep it organic to the actual scenario, and you might, you know, just say this is the dance floor, and this is considered one zone. And then, you know, let's say the main entrance, there's like a stairwell, you know, like one of those broad kind of stairwells that leads into this area from like another room, like a foyer. And so you actually might, usually I would kind of lump a smaller section, like just a little minor staircase or something, with either this zone or with this zone, but you know, you could call this the foyer, and that, like, there's a door here that like leads out into the main concourse, and this might be a separate area here. And then, you know, you've got like this bar, this kind of like curved bar that wraps around on this end, and there's some stools and stuff like that. And then maybe there's like the, you know, you've got the dance floor right here, but maybe you've got this section which is where all the dining is going on. So you've got all these tables and stuff like that for the fine dining. And then, so, you know, this is like the dining area, and this is like the little bar area. So anyway, that's kind of like enough to kind of get you started on the concept. So you can see you've got kind of this building layout, and it kind of divides itself naturally into several zones. So you have a dance floor zone, you have the dining area zone, you have the bar zone, you have the foyer, and you could attach the stairs. I would attach the stairs maybe to the foyer for ease of reference, and then you've got this door that leads out into the concourse, and the front concourse might be its own zone. So characters who are generally, you know, within the same zone, if there was two PCs and there were like, say there were like 3 PCs in this zone, or I mean, excuse me, NPCs in this zone, and then they're being surprise attacked or whatever. So there's 2 that run in from the main concourse, and they're over in this zone, and then somebody pops up from behind the bar, and they're over in this zone, and so characters within the same zone can pretty much freely interact cinematically with each other. It doesn't take any kind of special actions to like close the distance. You don't have to worry, I have a movement of 30 feet, but he's 40 feet away, so I can't reach him this round, etc., etc. So zones are supposed to be understood to be an area that's large enough that gives you some freedom, but it's also small enough that it's reasonable that these characters could interact with each other within a given round. And so they can throw things at each other, they could rush up and attack each other or whatever. But the characters in other zones, they actually have to kind of dedicate actions to moving around. So if these goons over here wanted to engage the PCs, they would have to basically take a move action or whatever the equivalent system would be, and move into this zone to try and engage these PCs. Likewise, the PCs would have to move to this zone if they wanted to engage these NPCs, but if they had ranged weapons and if the range on those weapons was significant enough, they could actually throw things at each other between zones or fire weapons at each other between zones. And so I generally like this concept. I like the idea of zones and areas because it gives you, again, it's like a visual representation, and it spells the scene out clearly enough for the players that they get an idea for where everything is, without having you having to show them exactly where every table is and where every chair is and where every NPC is and how far away they are, and what's 30 feet away versus what's 40 feet away versus what's 45 feet away. And so I like using zones, and I even pretty much use them interchangeably with any of the game systems that I run, because it's not difficult to think in terms of zones when you just think a zone should be basically an area about the size of one character's normal move action in a round. So in a round they can interact with anybody in their zone, or if they take a move action they can move to an adjacent zone and they can interact with anybody over there, etc., etc. So I like zones. I like using zones in all role-playing games, and I find that it gives a nice kind of middle ground between giving a definition, like giving a combat map, but not tying everything down into increments of 5 feet, which is what distracts me. I think it's that getting that precision of everything has to be detailed in terms of 5 feet away from everything else. I think zones is really a freeing concept as far as that goes.